Hello, welcome to another Pitt mailbag show from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Your Pitt beat writers here, Chris Carter and Stephen Thompson, breaking things down and answering your questions right here on this show every Tuesday. Happy New Year's Eve, everybody. It's college football playoff season. Pitt's not in it, but there's still a lot of excitement there, and there's still a lot of excitement around Pitt. A lot of crazy things going on as far as the transfer portal. ACC basketball is about to get started in full swing. So we got a lot of questions to get to for this episode. Let's get right into it. You saw our post-game show after Pitt's football's bowl loss. We will get into that. But the big news right now, Stephen, is the transfer portal. It's been mostly good news. There have been some hitches. But Will gets right into it here with this question. Said Pitt's keeping Eli Holstein, Desmond Reed, the Sharks as in all three of the younger linebackers, Kyle Lewis, Rasheem Biles, Braylon Lovelace, but they're losing guys like Sincere Edwards, the true freshman defensive end who had 3 sacks, and Ryland Gandy, who was the team's top cornerback this season. And they said, is that sustainable for this program to succeed? Stephen, I think people need to remember with the transfer portal, everybody gonna lose somebody. The key is to not lose your key players. And listen, I think Sincere Edwards has a lot of potential. I think Ryland Gandy had potential, and he'd been kind of guy you've been home growing for a while. But if I'm naming the priorities there, that the 3 top linebackers who were all big playmakers, your number 1 running back, your number 1 quarterback, those seem like pretty good priorities to be winning right there.
Yeah, I agree with you. They seem to have kept more than they've lost, and the losses look worse right now because they haven't added much. There are few programs that have added much at this point in the portal calendar. I mean, the portal just closed, but that doesn't mean that guys can't exit it. I think you're going to see a longer run of commitments kind of after the new year, heading into the spring semester for Pitt. So. Like you said, I mean, Sincere Edwards, I think, had a lot of talent and could have been something for Pitt down the road. But again, he was a backup who was maybe either 3rd or 4th defensive end this past year. And Ryland Gandy had some inconsistencies at time. He's a pretty big loss, but, I still don't think that Pitt has lost anyone in the portal that is necessarily irreplaceable or was, going to be a massive part of what they were doing next year. And even if Gandy was a starter, I don't think he was perfect. And he's not, his production last year is not irreplaceable. And you balance that with keeping Eli Holstein and keeping Desmond Reed and keeping those 3 linebackers who I think might have been a little bit tougher to replace. That's the good news for Pitt, I think. So like I said, just, I understand why it looks bad, especially that Gandy news came as a surprise to me and you too, I think. But the guys that they have been able to keep, I think, are very important as well. And I think back to last year where around this time, we didn't know everyone that they were going to have for this year's team. And even the guys that they did eventually add through the transfer portal, we didn't know how big of contributors they would be until literally the first game of the year, or maybe late in training camp if you had some great foresight. So have a little bit of patience with the transfer portal. I won't sugarcoat and tell you that losing Ryland Gandy or Sincere Edwards is good, but it's not out of the ordinary for a program in Pitt Station, and it's not like those guys they don't have the capability to replace them through the transfer portal as well.
Another thing to remember is that, like, part of this is coming down to, like, players are expecting money now. Like, players are expecting, and it's why, every program is trying to charge more money for seat licenses or finding every which way that they can just get more money into the programs so that they can have NIL money to burn and be able to throw money at players. And well, let's be real. Pitt's not one of those top programs that's pulling in money right now. So if they're going to if it comes down to, keeping players, they've got to prioritize. And if you're prioritizing, you're keeping your quarterback who started off the season with 6 straight games of 3 touchdown passes in each of them. You're keeping your running back that led the team, in all-purpose yardage and was, one of the top in that in the country. And your linebackers were the heart of your defense, and you kept all 3 of them. I didn't think there'd be a way. And granted, transporter's never over. Like, they can still. Dayon Hayes left in April last year. So, one of these linebackers or all of these linebackers could leave at some point this season. But the fact that they got commitments to stay from all three of their young linebackers. I did not see that coming, Steven. I thought that would be they would lose one of, like, they would keep Kyle Lewis because he was the priority. Maybe they'd keep Lovelace because he's local, but like they'd lose Rasheem Biles. They got all three back. And again, I think that's an asset to them.
Yeah, absolutely. They have, like I said at the top, they have retained more than they've lost, in my opinion. I think before Gandy hit the portal, there were only like 3 combined starts, like between the 14 guys that they had enter the portal. So Gandy is really, in my opinion, the first big loss since here Edwards. You could maybe throw into that basket too, but it's keeping the biggest guys out of the portal, and they still have a ways to go as far as adding guys. But I think that we're going to see some different things down the rest of January here, going into spring ball. So reserve judgment, I think, until that's done.
I hear you there. Let's move on to this question from Tom Buck2 on Twitter, who asks, does the perspective and optics of the season change at all if any of the half dozen things go the other way and Pitt wins the bowl game to finish 8-5 instead of 7-6? I mean, Steven, you were there. The optics of the game certainly were not good. So I would say, to answer the question simply, yes. I mean, does it change the fact that Pitt lost its last 5 straight regular season games? No. I mean, people are still going to look at this and say that, man, what a blown opportunity there. But you would have at least gone out. Like, let's say, you know what, on that last play, or that third down pass, Gavin Bartholomew hits Isaiah Neal. He catches it. They get the touchdown there. Gavin Bartholomew gets carried off the field. And even though it's not a big bowl win or anything like that, it's something to celebrate. And it's a positive feeling, and not this feeling of just gut-wrenching disappointment there. That is worth something. And I think that, yes, it would have been better there. But I get the question here from Tom Buck too, because, at the end of the day, Pitt would probably celebrate its win. And a lot of people who want to poo-poo it would be like, well, you beat Toledo. Who cares?
Yeah. It's interesting that Tom asked about perspective and optics, because those things are important, but I think those things would have changed even if, the material condition of this team did not change at all. I don't think it would have changed anything tangible for Pitt football, but, we wouldn't have spent the past week or so just complaining about them losing to Toledo. So I think it might have made some Pitt fans feel better. Pitt would have gotten to celebrate a really remarkable win in the longest bowl game in college football history, the longest game period in Pitt history. And I think that would have been cool on its own. But yeah, at the end of the day, it wouldn't have changed anything material about it. So I think perspective and optics could have changed. I mean, it's just, it is always so different. I mean, you and I know this super keenly when we interact with fans and things like that. The week after a win is always miles better than the week after a loss. And that's just kind of the nature of football. When you play one game a week, it's easy to make every loss or win a referendum on the team and the program at large. But it wouldn't have changed anything material. But I don't think he's off base here. I think the perspective and optics could have changed, especially considering that Pitt was down, 28 players in that game between the transfer portal and injury. There are a lot of guys out, and Pitt came very close to pulling out a remarkable win when they were very undermanned.
No, I agree with you there. Lots of factors into that, and again, it does not make the disappointment of the loss any less. But I think there is some reality there about that situation and what Pitt was going through there in that game. Let's flip to Pitt basketball. Some higher notes there, and maybe some higher notes coming for Pitt basketball as far as the injury front. McKee Plays Panthers asks on Twitter, any update on when we can expect to see Damian Dunn back on the court? Damian Dunn, of course, was a starting guard for the Pitt Panthers. He was kind of in that sort of 3 role where Jeff Capel likes to have a third ball handler on the court with Jalen Lowe and Ishmael Leggett. Now, for those who don't remember, he was injured in the Greenbrier tournament. I believe he was injured in the Wisconsin game, if not the LSU game. But either way, that would have been either the 22nd or the 24th. So you're talking about the end of November there. And Jeff Capel, was reported it was a 6-week injury. So if we go from, I think it actually was that Friday, I think it was the LSU game. And you go from the 22nd, you'd have pretty much all the way through 6. Yeah, this next weekend would be the first weekend of when he can start to come back. So do not expect him to play Wednesday when they get things going against Cal. And I wouldn't expect them against Stanford on Saturday, but I do think that that's when you'll see the window open up for him to start practicing, get in tune with the team, and it might be another couple games, but it might be that weekend after that weekend of the 11th of January when maybe you can start to expect Damian Dunn back.
Yep. So we're looking at, I think, the Duke game, and then I believe they return home to play Louisville. They play Duke on the 7th, and then Louisville on the 11th at home. So those are the two games that I would kind of target and think about. Those are probably the ones that Damian Dunn could return in. We'll probably get an update at some point next week from Jeff Capel about just kind of his status and what he's able to do around this 6-week mark and when he's able to return. We heard a couple weeks ago that they were still expecting it to only be 6 weeks, but that could mean a lot of things. Is he being fully cleared at 6 weeks, or is he being, partially cleared to get back to maybe shooting around and not necessarily doing contact? There's a lot of variables there, and Dunn's also got to get back into game shape, which is something that is pretty hard to do when you're off for 6 weeks.
It is very hard to do. Granted, it was a wrist injury, so maybe he's been able to do some leg work, just away from the team and not doing it where he can endanger his wrist injury. But so they expect Damian Dunn not back this week, but maybe the weekend after that. So there's but as far as we know, he's still on his timetable. We asked Jeff Capel, he said no updates when we last asked him. All right, last question goes to Todd, who sent this in via email. Todd asks, with ACC play about to begin, what's the biggest thing Pitt basketball must improve to stay in talks as a tournament team? And I think let's start with that point. Pitt right now is a tournament team. If you look at the AP poll, they're right outside the top 25. You look at the net rankings, they're inside the top 10. They're doing all the things that Pitt's supposed to do with the non-conference schedule. Now it's about playing well in the ACC. Steven, if you're going to focus on one thing, that if Pitt improves this, they would lock themselves in the tournament, and not just in the tournament, but like in a significant part of the tournament where they're not a play-in game. They're not like a super low seed. They're an actual seed that can be in a good spot to maybe get a win or two and go on a run.
Yeah, I would say the defense has got to get better. This was a team that really hung their hat on their defense early in the season. It's a really long team. It's a team that rebounds pretty well, or has rebounded pretty well the past couple of years. But that slipped a little bit. The offense has kind of become, if you look at least Ken Palm, the adjusted efficiencies there, I think they're up to 19th in offensive efficiency, but 35th in defense. Even in the games that they've won, like blowouts against Eastern Kentucky or Sam Houston, they've given up some three-pointers. They've allowed lesser teams to score some points on them. So I think the defense has to really improve at kind of a couple different levels. So the guards have to be a little bit better kind of at the point of the attack and keeping guys in front of them. And then you need to make sure that your bigs aren't in bad situations. That's an extension of the perimeter defense. You have to make sure that guys can't drive and kick. You have to make sure that you're not putting your bigs in foul trouble, and then they can't defend the rim in that way. And then, the rebounding has sometimes not been exactly what you want. So I think that's mostly just, I wouldn't say effort. It's not like this team isn't trying hard, but it's focus and discipline, and it's sticking with your man and knowing your assignment and knowing the scouting report and communicating, especially when teams try to put you in ball screens and put you in different actions. Pitt's defense has got to get better over these next couple weeks to make sure they're ready to face, especially a really good Duke team, and then a Louisville team that can also score a bunch against them. And defense is also going to travel. So if you want to make sure that you can avoid a slip up or a trap game against a bad ACC opponent, and they're playing bad teams in the ACC that Pitt will play on the road, you got to make sure that you bring the defense every night.
I agree. It needs to be a calling card of this team, and with the offensive firepower they had, if that can be a calling card for this team on top of this, that can make them a really good team. That means if their defense, we talked to Jalen Lowe on Monday at the Pete, and one thing he talked about was like, listen, we've had very few games where we've played really good defense in the first and second halves. Oftentimes we've kind of done it in one half or the other. We need to be able to make that consistent, and that's been their focus during this break. If Pitt can become a team that 8 games out of 10, their defense is just making you work, up and down the court, game in, game out, and and it's like not only you dealing with that, but then you're dealing with Jalen Lowe's ability to drive, Ishmael Leggett's ability to drive, Zach Austin hitting from 3, Brandon Cummins hitting from 3, and then all that spread in the floor gets Cam Corrin an open look. If Guillermo can hit 3s, and then Amso gets go like that. There's a rotation there to be had. So I agree with you there. Like there's things there that if they can get that going, that's a big part. I think I also look at the bigs in general. Not that the bigs need to become superstars, because I'm not saying for them to play outside of themselves, but if they can just be more consistent on defense with where they're supposed to be, I think there's a couple times they've been out positioned and they've kind of lost out. If they can just neutralize other bigs, they don't need to be destroyers. Like Cam Corrin does not need to turn into Shaquille O'Neal overnight, or Ontario Lett, or Chris Taft, or name it, DeJuan Blair. Just keep naming Pitt bigs. But like if you don't need him to be like Aaron Gray or anything like that. You just need him to be like, hey, you kind of, when Guillermo played against Mississippi State, not this year, of course, when they got destroyed, but in the tournament a few years ago, his job was just to kind of make it hard on their big, who was their leading scorer, to be able to take over the game, and he did that. If this group of forwards can do that game in and game out, Cam Corrin, Papa Conte, Guillermo Diaz-Graham, if they can make it hard on centers and teams bigs to just be able to run Pitt out the paint, that can be another mitigating factor that allows Pitt's guards to be the difference makers in each of these games.
Yeah, I mean, I would push back a little bit and just say that those bigs actually have been fairly good defensively. I feel like their offense is the thing that I'm a little bit more worried about. I think they can definitely benefit from throwing Papa Conte in there for a little bit more minutes, just to, avoid some foul trouble and give them a little bit more physicality, and just keep the guys fresh. I think that's a really important thing to do. But their offense is the thing, at least in the front court, that I'm more worried about, especially if Dunn's going to be out for another week or so. If he's not able to play in that Duke game, it'd be especially huge. Pitt needs like a third scorer, like a third guy that can give you 10 plus points a game.
I agree with that.
For a while, Dunn being out obviously really hurts that, but then you kind of expect Corrin to fill that role a little bit more. You figured Guillermo might be able to, if he knocks down a couple threes a game, then he can get there. But for right now, Pitt really hasn't had a guy like that. It's been pretty much all on Jalen Lowe and Ishmael Leggett. And so that is, if there's one other thing, I would love to see Cam Corrin be a little bit more aggressive, scoring the post around the rim. Guillermo, if he can knock down some threes at a rate that we've seen him knock them down like before, that makes Pitt a lot more dangerous too. So I agree the front court needs to get a little bit better. I would say it's more on the offensive side than the defensive side, though.
We will see how that plays out in the coming weeks. Pitt basketball back in action New Year's Day. Stephen and I will be there at Peterson Event Center for a 2 p.m. tip-off. That'll be a fun time as that's going on. Keep it here with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette for all of our updates about Pitt football and Pitt basketball and Pitt volleyball as well. Torrey Stafford hitting the portal. How about that? That's a whole other ball game. But we got a lot of coverage on what Pitt's been doing this year, and we will continue with that coverage as basketball season is about to kick into high gear with ACC season underway. From Chris Carter and Stephen Thompson, thanks again for tuning into the Pitt Mailbag Show every Tuesday on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of those episodes, as well as the daily content that comes from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.